It's time for the biggest story of the day. This is What Made the Cut with JJ and Alex on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
This segment also brought to you by Trajan Wealth. Give Trajan Wealth a call today, your local financial fiduciary, 801-899-7600, or visit their website at TrajanWealth.com. Mondays are hard, but they've been especially difficult today for Steve Bartle, who's had to work extra hard because of some surprising breaking news we heard today. Steve, you're grinding. We appreciate you joining us. How are you doing?
Good, man. It's days like today that just give you life.
Steve, there's better ways to get life than breaking news, but we love it in this business, don't we? Did you wake up this morning thinking you were going to have to write that headline?
I did not wake up thinking that would be something, but it wasn't shortly thereafter that I got a couple texts that said something could be coming later today. And so, you know, it's interesting talking about this decision. And, you know, there's a lot of criticism from a national perspective, given the fact that Utah has exceeded, you know, expectations of what they were believed to be capable of doing in the Big 12, picked 16th preseason. They're currently sitting 9th and, you know, have a couple opportunities to add to their win total. And so from a national perspective, this is generating some criticism, but I think as you hone in here more locally, and you know, as I've talked to folks, this is something that has been brewing for quite some time. This is not a decision that they made, you know, out of it wasn't an abrupt decision. I think this has been something that Mark Harlan and, you know, the other people involved in that decision-making process have stewed over for quite some time. And there's a lot of things that, you know, probably won't get talked about from a national perspective as reasons why Craig was let go. But I do know that you know, there's a lot of there were a lot, you know, behind the scenes, there was just a lot going on there, and also not a lot going on there. And I think, you know, specifically to Craig, relationships deteriorated over time, important relationships that, you know, for a head coach in today's basketball world, it's important to maintain relationships with people that support the program, and those deteriorated over time. And then, you know, I know that the alumni and basketball players that have come through the program over the years and years past, that there was never really a great relationship between them and former players. And those are all things that I think have come to a head for Utah in this decision. And I think, you know, when you factor those things in, combined with just sort of the inconsistency that Craig's teams have always seemed to have. They've added a nice couple big wins, but then they fall on their face against programs that you think they should be able to take care of business with. All of that culminated into today's decision for Utah to make the change. And I think, you know, you don't make this change unless you have you know, inkling or a pretty good idea, at least, of where you want to go next. I think Utah is pretty determined to bring somebody in that they feel will help them elevate the ceiling of the program. I think Craig provided a good idea of what the floor can be coming into the Big 12 and being as competitive as they were. But I think there was just a lot of doubt about his ability to get Utah where they want to be. And I think expectations with a move like this are going to change and are going to have the bar raised moving forward. And I think that's an important thing for Utah basketball. So, you know, this is a big change, a surprising one to say the least. And I think for Utah, getting the right guy in the building can do a lot to kind of change the vibes around the program.
Yeah, I mean, Definitely, man. I was kind of perplexed about the timing as well, right? Maybe you can shed some light on that, if you put your managerial hat on, or maybe your managerial conversations. What is behind the timing? There's 4 games left in the season. I know there was rumblings about moving on from him even before the season had started. You're not at the bottom of the conference where you were projected to. You still have a winning record. What is behind the firing at this point in the season?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the thing that everybody is I don't want to say getting hung up on, but I think everybody is curious as to why now, right? With 4 games left, the Big 12 tournament, you just beat Kansas and Kansas State, and I think for Mark Harlan and the people involved in the decision-making process and the future of the program and those that support the program, I think, if you already felt that Craig was not going to be the guy that could help you become a perennial contender in the Big 12 conference, that you essentially, if Craig Smith were to add a couple more wins, it makes it much more difficult to let him go in the offseason. And so I think that was certainly something that factored into this, there's what's the word I'm looking for? Just the belief in him beyond this season. I just don't think it was that great. And I think, I can't say exactly when the decision was made that Utah was going to part ways, but this was not something that they've come to recently from what I've gathered. I believe that this was something that they felt they were going to do, and it was going to take a pretty big season in terms of Utah coming into the Big 12 and getting a lot of signature wins. I think it was going to take something pretty significant for Craig this season to secure his future at Utah basketball. And that hasn't been the case this season. So I think with the loss to UCF and the manner in which Utah lost the game with 19 turnovers, and that's just been a consistent issue this season and in years past that has not been addressed. I think coming off of that loss, I think it was just the moment that Harlan felt was the right time to make that decision to avoid any further headache, I guess would be the word, with Craig potentially getting hot late in the season and adding a few more wins, because we've already seen the criticism that Utah has received for letting him go now with coming off of, the Kansas and Kansas State wins, right? And so if he were to add, another win against Arizona or BYU, it just makes it that much more difficult to make a change. And if you believe that a change is necessary, I think it was the right time for Utah to make this move. So it's an unfortunate situation. I like Craig a lot. He's always been great to interact with. I think he's a good coach. I think there are certainly things that he can work on and improve and become an even greater coach. But I do think there's a lot of potential for Utah basketball, and I think making a move now, as difficult as it may seem and as much criticism as the move is going to receive, I think if Utah plays their cards right, they get the right guy in there, that this will ultimately be to Utah's greater benefit in the immediate and distant future.
All right, let's talk about who that guy is going to be. If you go to KSLSports.com right now, Steve's already on it. He's got his Utah basketball head coach big board, potential targets 1.0. Run us through some of the guys that you think are at the top of their list. They obviously have a plan, and I, like you say, I believe you're right. The timing has something to do with, A, the fact that they got the buyout secured, and B, they know where they're going here. So who are they leaning?
Yeah, just, initial indications, with this move, point to Alex Jensen being the top guy for Utah. And when you consider the history here between Alex Jensen and Utah, right? We know the last time that there was an opening at Utah just a few years ago, Alex Jensen was a part of that process. We can, he was offered the job. He wasn't offered the job. I don't know exactly, but Alex just wasn't in a situation that he felt wasn't in a place where he felt he could take the job. And at that time he was with the Utah Jazz. The Utah Jazz were playing great basketball, and he was the top assistant for Quinn Snyder, and it seemed like things were trending in the right direction for him to potentially earn a head coaching gig, if not at Utah, somewhere else. And so as the years have gone by, the last few years, I think Alex Jensen is in a different situation, being with the Dallas Mavericks, where this could potentially make a lot of sense for Alex to come home to Salt Lake City and for Utah to make him the guy. And I think there's a lot of motivation from supporters of the program to bring Alex in. And so we'll see if that's what ends up happening. But I think Alex Jensen, just based on what I've gathered so far, I think he's the leading candidate. And how quickly this all comes together, we'll soon find out. But I do think Utah would like to get him potentially hired if obviously things go well and the interviews and all that stuff and all of that. But I think he's the leading candidate. Behind him, Andre Miller, he's going to be an interesting one. So he's been coaching with the Grand Rapids in the G League, and I know that I have him listed on the head coaching board. And while he certainly could be a candidate, I think he's also an option to become an assistant coach at Utah basketball, regardless of who the head coach is. So, he is going to be someone to keep an eye on, regardless of who is hired as head coach. He could be the head coach, but I don't think that's as likely. I think an ideal situation for Utah, grand slam situation for Utah, you're able to bring in Alex Jensen and Andre Miller together. How doable is that? I don't know exactly, but I know that there's a lot of hope and a lot of optimism that that can be the move. Beyond those two, there's a lot of really good candidates for Utah to consider. A couple names that I really like in particular: Bryce Drew at Grand Canyon University. He's done a great job of turning that program into a contender. Grand Canyon University it's a small program, but he's recruited some really good talent to that program. Being there in Phoenix, in that area, he has a lot of connections throughout that area, which is, it's a pretty strong basketball community. So you would have access to talent there. He's developed a really good program on the floor, both offensively and defensively. So he's a guy that I really like. And Richard Pitino at New Mexico, I think would be an excellent option for Utah. He's coached at the Power 5 level, with Minnesota previously. Things didn't finish well there for him, but he's really revitalized his career at New Mexico. And when you look at what he's done, he's recruited well. He's retained good pieces there at New Mexico, and he's turned them into a top contender in the Mountain West Conference. And with that Pitino name, that would certainly garner a lot of excitement from the fan base. So those are probably the four names that I look at first and foremost, and then there's a number of other options that we can get into if you want. But those are probably the big names to pay attention to.
Yeah, those are all really, really great names that you pointed out. We had Josh Grant on earlier, and he was advocating for Alex Jensen as well. But it takes two to tango in this situation. Is there, that you've heard, is there any pushback? Or, is Alex Jensen even interested in something like this? Or are we just spitballing names in hope? So we know Andre Miller, Alex Jensen, Rick Pitino. Would those be anything where these guys wouldn't come or wouldn't even do interviews?
Yeah, no, I do think I know that there's interest with Andre Miller coming into the program. Mm-hmm. I know that he was willing to join Craig Smith's staff last year, but it just didn't work out. Craig Smith hired a couple of his guys, and that's what ended up happening there with Andre. So I know that there's interest there. With Alex Jensen, I think it's important to understand that he's in a much different situation now than he was a couple years ago when he was with the Utah Jazz. And I think one guy, with the zone, Scott Gerard has a great relationship with him. And, he mentioned earlier today, I was on with them earlier today, and he mentioned that he believes Alex is in a different place, personally. And so I think there's certainly reasons to be optimistic that, there are actually legs to this. And based on what I've gathered, I do think, we'll see some movement here pretty soon between Utah and Alex Jensen, and we'll learn pretty quickly, how interested Alex might be in the job. I do think, just based on what I've heard, that there is mutual interest, and so it'll be up to Utah to get the job done.
One name that wasn't on the list, I noticed, Johnny Bryant, you did not include on the list. Was there a reason for that, or is it just so far down the list, and with him being in the NBA, you just didn't think it was that strong of a possibility?
Yeah, I think so. With a couple of the updates, Johnny Bryant was actually one of them, and I've heard that there was a call between Utah and Johnny Bryant, and it sounds like Johnny is pretty focused on remaining in the NBA, which is great for him. He's in a great situation, and so I think that one is just it's essentially where Alex Jensen was a couple of years ago. He's trending really well in the NBA, and I think he's focused on staying there, and so that's where that's at. That's why I didn't include Johnny.
No, makes a lot of sense, and I think Utah fans would want clarity on that if they're reading. They see him on a list. Like, why isn't Johnny Bryant on the list? Well, Bartle's got you covered. Bartle's got some inside info on that one. So there you go. Just overall thought, basketball at a whole at Utah. This is the last one I have for you, Steve. I'm older than you. I'm 47. I remember when Utah was basically a blue blood in this sport. Back in the 90s, my goodness. I mean, they were in the tournament every year. They won games every year under Majerus. They've been to Final Fours, multiple. Like, this program should be in the top 25 every year, and it hasn't been for the last 20 years with a few exceptions. 9 straight years without an NCAA tournament. Can this be done? Can somebody like Alex Jensen come in here and revive the glory days? What is it going to take to get Utah back to what it used to be?
Yeah, I think Alex is somebody that is capable of reigniting some passion around the program, and I think that is something that's been missing. When you look in the Big 12 and you see the fan bases that come out and support their teams, and you can look none further than 50 miles south of Provo with what BYU has going on, the impact that a strong fan base can have. And I think that's been something that has been a missing element. And so I think with Utah, right, getting something done that can reignite that passion will have a huge impact on the future of the program. And I think getting somebody in there that can capitalize on that and build for the future and turn Utah into a perennial contender, I think that is sort of what this move is indicating, is that, even with Utah ending up ninth, they're currently ninth in the Big 12, Craig Smith has shown that, Utah can be competitive in this league with minimal support around him. I think the hope and belief is that with the right hires, that it reignites the passion and gets greater support, draws greater support from the fan base and from those that support the program, and that Utah can become a top contender in the Big 12 conference. When you think of the Big 12, you think of Kansas and Baylor, Texas Tech, programs that have won national championships in this league, and you think, well, we were this good with minimal support. If we can get the right guy in there, I think we can raise the bar here at Utah. And I think that's kind of the hope and focus. And with what BYU has done, bringing in Kevin Young, who was a very good assistant coach in the NBA, a long-time assistant coach, with what he's done with BYU, I think that's been a reason for motivation, or that's been motivation to make this Alex Jensen thing become a thing. I think there's a lot of belief that he can do something similar for Utah with that. So I think, I do think Utah can. I think there's a lot of potential for Utah basketball to, take another step or two in this league, that they can be a top half contender in the league, and be a consistent NCAA tournament team. I think that's why you make this move. You raise the expectations for the program, and you work to become a perennial contender. And I think that's the hope and focus for Utah in making this move.
Yeah, Steve, I got one last question, and it's something around all of this, right? It's kind of the big topic around football, around anything in college sports right now with the NIL stuff going around, and how do you be competitive? Say you don't have that billionaire donor, right? Say you don't have like crazy donors, but you do have enough to be resourceful, right? Like, what does that look like? Especially with this day and age and NIL money flying around and possibly getting certain recruits. How do you build a program, develop guys, which is what Utah's normally used or known for, is being able to develop guys into great guys. What does that look like for Utah?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand kind of the competition in the Big 12 with NIL. To compete in the Big 12, with programs that are dumping $2 million into a single player, you just can't expect to compete at a high level when your entire team is right around 2 or 3 million collectively in NIL. And so I think, at a minimum, you've got to raise the floor. You've got to increase that budget, that number for Utah. And I think there's plenty of room to do that. With the support that Utah has. What's going to be interesting, though, is with the changes that are expected to come with the House settlement, how does that actually impact, how teams and programs go about this, right? Where it takes the burden off of supporters and people around the program donating to a collective. It now is going to come directly from the university. And so I think, Utah's obviously got to work their way through that. But I think at a minimum, you've got to look at investing $4 to $5 million in the money that you'll have available into the basketball program if you want to compete at a high level in the Big 12. I've dug around and tried my best to get some numbers, in terms of the NIL and of other programs. In 2023, this is two summers ago, Texas Tech had an NIL number collectively that surpassed 3 million. And so that was 2 years ago when NIL was still in its infancy. Baylor has had a payroll, essentially. I say payroll, but you know what I mean.
What it's becoming.
Same thing. I mean, very fine line, Steve.
Yeah, I know. 4 million very recently. And so, you can imagine that with the increasing amount of money that's being poured into these programs, Kansas and Kansas State were two programs that I was told collectively came in around 15 to 17 million, combined in terms of the amount of money invested in those two programs. Kansas is probably, closer to 10 million, while Kansas State is probably somewhere around 5 to 7. And so, that's what you're competing with. And I do think Utah has room to grow in that sense where you can get a few more boosters opening up. But again, with the House settlement, it's all due to change, and we'll learn, how that all shakes out, over the coming months. But I do think that's sort of where you need to get to, is around 5 million for Utah to be competitive in that world.
Great insight on the news that Craig Smith is out as head coach of the Utah men's basketball program. Steve Bartle, all over it as always. Thanks for joining us, Steve. Appreciate it. And it's one of those long days, but I hope you're enjoying it.
Appreciate you, fellas. Thanks so much for having me on.
Steve Bartle, Utah Utes insider for KSL Sports.com. You can go read all of the coverage of this big story on KSL Sports.com.